Like I mentioned before, you're going to want to take a look at your ingredients list well before you start cooking. You'll want to look for specific types of ingredients being used and the quantity so you can confirm you have enough on hand before you begin. We're going to use this classic brownie recipe as an example. Let's take a look at this list. This list tells you a lot about the recipe you're going to make. First, note any specifics the recipe chooses to include. For example, unsalted butter versus salted, all-purpose flour versus self-rising flour, unsweetened chocolate versus bittersweet versus sweet. These things all matter and can potentially alter the taste and texture of the final outcome. Take, for example, our butter. The recipe asks for unsalted butter. Now, if you just say, "Who cares? I'll add salted butter. It's what I have," your brownies might end up too salty because, as you can see, the recipe also calls for salt. Just think, by cutting corners, you may save time or maybe a trip to the grocery store, but you only gain a tray of super salty brownies that will usually end up in the trash. After that, you need to look at the specific quantities and measurements that are listed. This seems like a no-brainer, but it's where many cooks fail when following a recipe. First off, understand what is being asked. For instance, 1 cup chopped walnuts is not the same as 1 cup walnuts chopped. This comma indicates when the item should be measured. So 1 cup of chopped walnuts means measuring a cup of nuts after they've been chopped. Conversely, 1 cup of walnuts chopped means that the nuts should be measured whole and then chopped after. Like I mentioned before, this does matter. In some cases, especially when items are not weighed but measured with a cup or spoon, you will not net out the same quantity. For example, 1 cup of flour sifted. Sifting just means aerating using a tool called a sieve, versus the amount of 1 cup sifted flour are very different. Let's just go over a few common terms when you're reading measurements. The uppercase C or lowercase c generally means a cup, G, a gram, kg, a kilogram, capital L or lowercase l, a liter, lb, a pound, M, capital L, and M, lowercase l, is a milliliter, pt is a pint. And now, for the most common too, and the often most mistaken, lowercase t or TSP equals a teaspoon. An uppercase T, uppercase TB, TBL, or TBSP all can mean a tablespoon. A tablespoon is significantly larger than a teaspoon, so using one for the other can definitely alter your recipe. Then there are ounces. An ounce can mean a fluid ounce or an ounce in weight, depending on the ingredient. Use your better judgment to decide which. Generally, liquids are fluid ounces and solids are in weight. So take, for instance, our chocolate in this recipe. This asks for 4 ounces of bittersweet chocolate, coarsely chopped. That means before the chocolate is chopped, there should be 4 ounces by weight. Then there's the pinch. Everyone has a kind of idea of what a pinch really looks like, but if you want to be specific, it's usually between 1/16 and 1/8 of a teaspoon. It's the amount of, say, salt that can fit between your thumb and pointer finger. There's also measurements like the containers that things come in. For instance, a can. A can of something, say, Black beans or chickpeas generally come in a standard size 15-ounce can if not specified. So if you happen to have a larger can, you can measure out 15 ounces to equal a can in a recipe. We'll cover how to make these proper measurements in a later unit. Now that we've taken a look at all the quantities, we're going to want to make a list. I suggest taking all of your ingredients out of your cupboard and even your fridge and putting them on the counter. Make a list of all the things you are missing and in what quantities. Be especially mindful of ingredients that may need to be defrosted or brought to room temperature because, again, timing is everything. Finally, note the order of the items on your ingredients list. This is actually a cue for the cook on how the ingredients should be measured and used. For example, if a recipe calls for a tablespoon of honey and a tablespoon of oil, we call for the oil first, so that the honey, which is generally very sticky, will be easier to remove from the measuring spoon. In this arrangement, the recipe wants us to know that we'll be incorporating butter with 2 types of chocolate. See, they're listed together. Next will be the sugar, eggs, and vanilla, followed by our dry ingredients, and finally, our walnuts. This will be helpful to note when we set up our mise en place in Unit 2. So, before we do that, let's just move on to our instructions.